So, before the video starts, I'm aware that there are people that ask me questions in my first part of the Q&A, even though I was going to include the question I didn't answer in my announcement video in part 2. So here's the deal. Part 3 will have the questions from part 1, and this video will feature the questions for part 4. So write down your questions for part 4, and then both part 3 and 4 will be released. Now that's out of the way, let's get to the questions, shall we? If I had done my own versions of 2 Thomas & Friends movies and episodes, which 2 episodes from the model and CGI series and 2 movies would I pick? So, for the model series, 2 episodes I would do my own version of are The Flying Kipper and Edward and Gordon. As for CGI, probably that one episode that featured Gordon with diesel-like buffers, and that one episode that featured James with his distaste for freight cars. And as for movies, I'd probably do my own version of The Great Race, since I feel like that could have been Gordon's spotlight. And maybe The Adventure Begins, since I feel like Thomas's character could use some work of him being more of a prick than a clumsy engine. If you make characters from other cartoon shows as Thomas Tank Engine characters, which 6 characters would you pick? What class engine would each of them be? What color would you put them as? And what railway would they come from? Absolutely none of them. I'm not a big fan of Thomas Tank Engine crossovers with cartoons. Would you accept ideas for Thomas & Friends stories from those you have watched if it helps make your channel grow? Yes, but that depends on the idea on whether or not I like it or not. If you had to give 4 Thomas Tank Engine characters more screen time other than those that Tim of shits, which of the 4 would I pick? The 4 characters I would give more attention to would probably be Arthur, as it would be nice to see how his life is on the Normby branch line. Perhaps we can learn more about it and the history behind it. Murdoch, maybe to see how he's doing on the main line and to know if any trucks have tried to give him any trouble. Boko, see how his life on the Brendan branch is still going. And finally Molly. I would like to know why she's on Sodor or why she's even on Sodor. Considering she's a Claude Hamilton, designed for express work, perhaps there's an episode where she could have been featured handling an express service on the Northwestern Railway, but not the main express. Do you like Marvin's AU of RWS Canon 98462 and 87546? Despite some things I disagree with him on, I think his takes are okay. What are my thoughts on the LNER's second chief mechanical engineer, Edward Thompson? Even though I don't agree with his design choices, at the end of the day, he was just doing his job. Thoughts on Gordon being an LNER A3? Decent. Thoughts on Alfred the B-12 in general? Overrated, boring, and generic. What is your ideal first red engine? The engine that doesn't look like James. She's a TK&F built 4th row for a class that will be later classified as the NWR A2. What is my Peel Gultra electric engines roster? So far, only Stafford, but I will try to add 4 more bigger electric engines. What are the steam and diesel roster and classes of my universe? Far too much for me to say, I'll just put the list here. What TV characters are in your AU? Arthur, Emily, Molly, Rosie, Philip, Paxton, Sydney, and Neville. But I might add more though, so wait and see. Are cancelled characters like Barry and Bloomer are in my AU? Yes. Bloomer is one of the pre-group locomotives from the Northwestern Railway, while Barry is one of the preserved engines at the Vicarstown Museum. What happened to Diesel in my AU? Let's just say the Colored Torch has some nice words for him. What are the genders of all the rosters like Steam, Diesel, Electric in my AU? Cannot say, as that would be too much for me to explain. Who is the Titman Station pilot in the present day of my AU? The Austerity Tank. Speaking of which, is the Austerity Tank engine canon in my universe? Why yes she is. Do Pug, Ginty, and Mavis work on the Norfolk Quarry? The Norfolk Quarry is basically the Falkar Quarry of my universe, but otherwise, yes they do. However, Pug will be sold off to the China Clay Pits to work with Bill and Ben. Do you think that Gordon looks better as an LNER Gresley A1 or A3, or as a Raven A2, like Gregory from Engines of 8? I say A3. If Thomas was an LNER tank engine in my universe, which one would he be? I'm thinking either between a J50 or a J72. What's my take on Spencer, the private engine? Instead of being a chauffeur, he handles tourist trains, but is owned privately by the Duke and Duchess, but was eventually killed somewhere in the 1960s. Favorite class of steam engine from the LBSCR? The LBSCR L class. Do you have head codes in your Thomas & Friends universe? Yes. Opinion on Edward being of LNER 440? I mean, as long as it's Edward, then it's good. right? Are 98462 and 87546 gonna redeem themselves in your series if you're gonna put them in the story? Even though 98462 is polite in my universe, she can sometimes be a bit harsh. But as for 87546, he's somewhat of a bully, but has a soft spot for playing against like Thomas. Otherwise, wait and see. Do you like Toby working in the LNER, Great Eastern, or the Osborne Railway? To be honest, any could work for him, so I say any. Do you agree for me to make my James a free F? I mean, if you want me to make artwork out of it like I did with the rest of my ideals, then sure. But I'm not gonna make a video about it. I always recommend, like, being specific on which free F you're talking about. Do you plan on making any OCs? Yes, but not ones of my own. Do you like the Thomas and Friends custom of an engine? I have no idea what it is, so I don't know. Will I do a headcanon for the engines who used to work on the pre-existing railways before the NWR was formed? Yes. However, Clive, Matthew, Adam, and any of those characters will not be mentioned because they are other people's interpretations, and I've made my own. What is my favorite Sodor AU? Do the stories of Sodor count? Favorite railway series book? Wait a second, I already answered this one. What is your favorite and least favorite RWS book? My favorite railway series book is Enterprising Engines because it feels like it brings in lots of closure to many characters, like Gordon meeting his family, Henry being an underdog, Douglas saving Oliver. It just feels like closure has been given to these characters. Who is my most favorite and hated Thomas character? I said many times that Gordon is my favorite character, but since this question is all about a hated character that I hate the most, I think you can guess who. Favorite steam engine from the LNER? Wait a second, I already answered this question. I have more than just one favorite locomotive class, but if I were to choose one, it would have to be the LNER B12s. I also already answered this question as well. I do like Trapmaster and Playrow, but I also like Wooden Railway as well. What's my favorite movie? The White Tiger. Favorite interpretation of 98462? Max and Marlene Dudes. What do I think is the most interesting piece of media in Thomas and Friends? I would say the interesting part about Thomas media is the dynamic between characters and how they interact with each other. What video of mine is my favorite? To be honest, I honestly don't know. Are you going to make a video about the engines in the workshop Percy came from? If so, what class of the engine would you make them into? Maybe. But I'm not going to mention what I think the bases are just yet. Maybe when I make a video about that, I can. What would you do if the island of Sodor was real? Where would you go and why? Wellsworth, since that's where I can see the trains passing by and I can record them on my phone. Will you ever make a Roblox train series? If you do, what would it be about? Probably something similar to Engines of 8. What made you start YouTube in the first place? Long story short, the various users I've seen on YouTube. Are you going to adapt The Streak of Blue? I already did. Can you adapt Trampy Super Movie from 1 to 7? I'm not gonna do them. What app do you use to make your sprites? Sketchbook.